By 1:45 a.m., the neighborhood was alive with noise it wasn't built for. Cars lined both sides of the street, teenagers shouting over the throb of music spilling from a single-story home. The sticky Florida heat clung to their skin, the smell of beer and cigarettes drifting into the night. To a passerby, it was nothing more than a summer party. But only hours earlier, this had been a family's quiet evening. Dinner plates cleared, lights dimmed, a home that carried the weight of routine and trust. Now, as 60 teenagers laughed and danced, a door down the hall stayed shut. Behind it lay a silence that none of them dared to notice, a silence heavy enough to change everything. How does an ordinary home transform from a place of safety to the stage of something unspeakable? And how could it all begin with a single word? No. Welcome to Evil Crime Cases. Thanks for subscribing to our channel. Please like and share our videos, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comment section. Now let's get back to the details of the case. The street looked like it had been taken over. Cars hugged the curbs on both sides, engines cooling in the humid Florida air. From one house, music thundered so hard it shook the ground, bass lines rippling through the pavement. Teenagers moved in and out of the front door, red cups raised, their laughter spilling into the warm night like sparks from a fire. Inside, the living room was a blur of bodies, sneakers sliding across sticky floors, voices colliding with the music, smoke from a cigarette curling toward the ceiling fan. Someone shouted over the beat, another dropped a drink, and the crowd erupted in cheers. To anyone watching, it was pure chaos dressed as freedom, the kind of night every high schooler dreams about and every parent fears. No one dancing below asked why the kitchen was dark, why the parents hadn't come down the hall, or why that door remained closed. Only hours earlier, this same home had been ordinary, a family's dinner table cleared, the clink of dishes still fresh in memory. Now, 60 teenagers filled its rooms without realizing they were celebrating in a place that carried something unspeakable. If you had been there, drink in hand, shouting to be heard over the music, would you have felt it? The wrongness in the walls, the absence no one named? This wasn't just a party. It was the start of a night built on blood, and every beat of the music carried a secret that waited to be uncovered. To understand that night, we need to understand the family at the center of it all, the Freemans. Marcus Freeman was 45, a history teacher at the local high school. He carried himself with authority, the kind of man who believed respect wasn't given, it was earned. His students remembered him for the stories he told about wars and revolutions. But at home, his lectures often turned into strict rules. Marcus loved his son deeply, but love sometimes came wrapped in sharp edges. Denise, his wife, was 42, a nurse who worked long shifts. She was the anchor of the household, compassionate, generous, but also unbending when she felt a line had been crossed. Friends admired her strength. Neighbors said she could calm a storm just by listening. But under her patience was a firmness. She believed discipline today meant safety tomorrow. Their only child, 17-year-old Terrence, lived in the middle of those expectations. On the outside, he was quiet, thoughtful, often sketching faces in his notebook or retreating into music that blasted through his headphones. But in recent months, his quiet had shifted into something sharper. His clothes grew darker, his friends louder, his temper quicker. He was artistic, yes, but his art had begun to carry an edge of frustration, even rage. The Freeman home looked like any other suburban house on Magnolia Drive. Neatly cut grass, 2 cars in the driveway, porch light on by dusk. Inside, it carried a rhythm. Curfews, church on Sundays, phones handed over by 10 o'clock. Rules hung on the fridge like scripture. Terrence, once compliant, had started to test each one. He stayed out too late. He argued over curfew. He wanted to be treated like an adult in a household that still saw him as a boy. Neighbors saw the Freemans as the model family, hardworking parents, a smart son, a house filled with structure. But inside, love and defiance were colliding in ways only the 3 of them could feel. Every slammed bedroom door, every confiscated phone, every tense dinner conversation was another reminder that the bond between parent and child was straining. And on that summer weekend in 2011, that strain reached its breaking point. The Freemans believed their rules could protect their son. Terrence believed their rules were chains he had to break. What happens when a family built on faith and structure collides head-on with a teenager's hunger for freedom? No one in that house could see how close love was to breaking. But it would. And when it did, the cost would be unthinkable. By day, Terrence Freeman seemed ordinary enough. At school, he kept his head low, his voice soft, his homework neatly turned in. Teachers described him as dependable, the kind of student who never caused disruption. In smaller circles, though, a different energy surfaced. Friends remembered his quick wit, the way he could turn a quiet lunch into laughter with a single remark, or sketch a classmate in seconds with uncanny accuracy. To most, Terrence was simply a boy with promise. Introverted, maybe a little moody, but hardly alarming. But once the sun went down, and the glow of a computer screen lit his room, a darker thread began to show. On his social media accounts, some public, others hidden under usernames only a few recognized, Terrence shared fragments of himself that no teacher, no neighbor, and perhaps not even his parents could see. Posts about being controlled, comments about needing to prove everyone wrong, images of clenched fists, broken chains, even grainy memes about death and freedom. They weren't loud confessions, but quiet leaks of anger, spilling into a space where strangers nodded back with likes and brief replies. The difference between the boy at school and the boy online was more than mood. It was identity. In one world, he was a son and a student. In the other, he was someone who believed he was misunderstood, a young man desperate to carve out a place of his own, even if it meant breaking everything around him. This hunger for validation, every anonymous comment, every shared frustration, fed the parts of him that home life restrained. The stricter his parents became, the more he looked outward, building a persona that rejected their rules. Every no at home became a silent yes online. Looking back, the signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs. A classmate remembered him muttering once, "They think they own me." Another recalled a drawing in his sketchbook, an empty house, windows blacked out. To his peers, it was brushed off as creativity. To adults, if they had ever seen it, perhaps nothing more than teenage angst. But together, these fragments painted a picture of a boy who no longer felt seen, except by the faceless crowd behind a screen. The seeds of resentment were not sudden. They had been growing quietly, watered by rejection and sheltered by secrecy. He lived two lives, and the gap between them widened with each passing day. And the question that now haunts those who knew him is simple. Were the warnings always there, waiting for someone to notice? It was the evening of July 9th, 2011, 7 days before everything changed. Dinner had just ended in the Freeman household. The plates were stacked in the sink, the smell of baked chicken still hanging faintly in the air. The television buzzed with a rerun in the background, filling the silence with canned laughter. Terrence shifted uneasily on the couch, then spoke. His words were careful, but his eyes gave him away. He wanted a party, a back-to-school celebration, one night before senior year began. Music, friends, food, nothing wild, he promised. Just a chance to belong. Marcus leaned back, his brow furrowed. Years of teaching high school had left him with stories of teenagers who promised the same and ended the night with police at the door. Denise, still in her scrubs from a hospital shift, shook her head before Terrence had finished. She had seen enough broken bodies on weekend nights to know how quickly just a few friends could unravel. Their answer was simple, but firm. No. For Marcus and Denise, it was an act of love, a shield against danger. For Terrence, it landed like a blade. He had already hinted to classmates that the party might happen. He had pictured the music shaking the walls, his peers finally seeing him as someone who mattered. Now all of that dissolved in an instant. He tried to argue. Marcus told him about a former student who drank too much at a house party and never made it home. Denise mentioned the parents she had comforted in hospital corridors after nights gone wrong. But to Terrence, these weren't lessons. They were excuses. Each word deepened his sense of being controlled, unseen, dismissed. When the conversation ended, the room was heavy with unspoken resentment. Marcus turned the television louder, pretending the moment had passed. Denise busied herself in the kitchen, scrubbing harder than necessary. Terrence disappeared into his room, shutting the door with a quiet finality. It might have seemed like an ordinary family disagreement, parents setting boundaries, a teenager sulking. But that night, something in Terrence shifted. The refusal wasn't just about one evening. It was about everything he thought he'd been denied. And in the silence of his room, anger began to harden into resolve. The question that remains is haunting. How could one word, spoken with care, echo so violently in a boy's mind that it set the course for unthinkable violence? July 15th, 2011. West Palm Beach. By midnight, the Freeman household looked like any other. Marcus had dozed off in his armchair after watching the late news. Denise, careful as always, had placed her stethoscope on the dresser before slipping into bed, her alarm set for dawn. Upstairs, the hall light dimmed, the air conditioner hummed steadily, and for a moment the house felt wrapped in safety. But in Terrence's room, safety no longer held meaning. He sat hunched at his desk, headphones pressing hard against his ears. The same verse repeated, over and over, lyrics about control, about breaking free. He scrolled through messages on his phone, friends posting about summer nights, parties, freedom. Every line fed the thought that had been building for weeks. He was trapped, unheard, and the only way out was to make them hear him. At 12:37 a.m., Terrence left his room. The carpet muted his steps as he moved down the hall. In the kitchen, under the fluorescent light, his reflection caught in the blade drawer. His hand lingered before settling on an 8-inch chef's knife, its steel cold, fingerprints wiped away with the hem of his shirt. From the laundry room, he pulled a pair of thin latex gloves his mother kept for cleaning. He slid them on slowly, almost ritualistically. Upstairs, his parents slept, their breaths deep and even. Denise's hand rested gently on Marcus's chest, the simple gesture of a marriage built on trust. They could never imagine that, only feet away, their only child was rehearsing their final moments. The house stayed silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint shuffle of Terrence's movements. And then, stillness. Terrence stood at the foot of the stairs, knife in hand, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the rage he had nursed for so long. The question that lingers is not just how he crossed this threshold, but why. What can drive a 17-year-old to turn his family home into the stage for something irreversible? Night settles over the quiet home. Outside, the street is still, but inside, a storm brews in silence. Terrence moves barefoot down the hallway, his headphones pulled down to his neck, the faint hum of music still echoing in one ear. The knife in his hand catches a glint of dim light from the kitchen, now a weapon in the trembling grip of a teenager who has convinced himself that this night is no longer ordinary. Marcus lies in a master bedroom, chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. The sound of his snoring fills the air, familiar, almost comforting, a sound Terrence has known all his life. And yet tonight, it enrages him. He pauses at the doorway, heart pounding in his ears, the blade sweating in his palm. For a moment, he hesitates. But hesitation, once broken, can turn into fury. In a sudden, almost mechanical motion, Terrence crosses the threshold. The knife plunges downward. Marcus never has a chance to open his eyes. The silence of the house is split by the muffled gasp of a man, startled from his dreams, but unable to defend himself. Denise stirs. She opens her eyes to a vision no mother could ever imagine. Her son, standing over her husband, blood spattered across his face, blade rising again. Her scream tears through the room, desperate, raw. She lunges toward Terrence, clawing at his arm, her voice breaking. "Terrence, stop. Please, baby, stop." But the boy she raised is gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. The knife slashes, pierces. Her cries turn from words into choking sounds, filling the bedroom with chaos and terror. She fights, leaving scratches down her son's arms, her struggle marking him as much as the blade marks her. And then, suddenly, it ends. The room is left in a heavy silence broken only by the sound of Terrence's breathing, ragged, uneven. The air is thick with a metallic sting of blood. Shadows cast on the wall from the streetlight outside seem to mock the stillness inside. Terrence drags their bodies across the carpet, leaving smears that later would tell investigators the story of violence. He pulls them into the master closet, wraps them in blankets as if tucking them in for a distorted kind of sleep, and shuts the door. He turns the lock, as though locking away the evidence will also lock away the truth. Forensic investigators would later map every inch of that space. The cast-off stains on the walls, the arterial spray across the headboard, the drag marks on the carpet fibers. Each trace a silent witness, each detail spelling out the story Terrence would try to erase. And then, the house returns to quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just a teenager, sitting alone in the dark, in a home that now holds its dead. But perhaps the most chilling question lingers in the silence. How could Terrence, after this night, walk through these rooms, eat in the kitchen, and sleep under this roof, while his parents lay hidden only feet away? Morning light creeps through the blinds of the Freeman home, yet the house feels strangely hollow. The voices that once filled its rooms, Marcus calling out reminders, Denise humming softly in the kitchen, are gone. In their place is silence, broken only by the faint tap of phone keys. Seated in the living room, Terrence crafts a message. Party at my place tonight. Parents out of town. He hits send. The words ripple outward like a stone dropped into still water. Within minutes, notifications chime across town. Friends forward it. Anticipation spreads. To them, it's harmless fun. To him, it's camouflage. The image of a party boy is easier to sell than the image of a killer. Terrence walks through the house, careful in his movements. He sprays deodorizer in wide arcs, wipes fingerprints from counters, straightens throw pillows. The hall bathroom gets extra attention. The living room rug is vacuumed twice. He focuses only on what will be seen, what will be judged. Everything else, the shadows, the silence, the door at the end of the hallway, remains off limits. That door is locked. Behind it, reality waits. The irony is sharp. This house was once a place of safety, a warm and orderly space nurtured by parents who worked long hours so their son could have a better life. Denise's touch still lingers on the freshly folded towels in the bathroom. Marcus's stack of graded essays sits untouched in his study. Their presence remains everywhere, yet nowhere. And tonight, dozens of teenagers will unknowingly dance over the grave of that absence. Terrence does not prepare like a boy planning a party. He prepares like someone staging a performance. He scrolls through his playlist, turning the volume high enough to mask creaks, muffled enough to avoid suspicion from neighbors. He lines up cups in the kitchen, checks the fridge for soda, double-checks the lock on the master bedroom. Every detail is a distraction layered over what he knows cannot be hidden forever. As the hours pass, his phone buzzes relentlessly. I'll be there. What time? Bring drinks. One message after another confirms what he wants. A crowd. Noise. Movement. Life. To drown out what he cannot silence. For his classmates, it will feel like freedom. No adults hovering. No one saying when to stop, when to go home. For Terrence, it is something else. A defiance so extreme it dares anyone to question him. By nightfall, 60 teenagers will stream into this house, red cups in hand, laughter echoing through the walls. They will shout over the music, pose for pictures, spill drinks on the carpet. They will dance just feet away from the locked closet, never realizing what lies inside. And here's the question that lingers, heavy and unshakable. If you had walked into that house on Magnolia Drive that night, would you have sensed the truth pressing in from behind that locked door? By 9 o'clock that night, the quiet order of Magnolia Drive had been overturned. Cars clogged both curbs, headlights flashing as more teenagers piled out. The hum of cicadas was drowned beneath bass that rattled the windows of the Freeman home. From every angle, it looked like the kind of party kids would brag about on Monday. Clusters of teens laughed as they climbed the front steps, slipping bottles of vodka and rum from backpacks, balancing cases of beer between them. Text messages zipped across town. "It's packed already. Hurry before the cops roll by." The promise of freedom lured them in. Inside, the scene was chaos. The living room pulsed with music, so loud the floors seemed to vibrate. Sneakers stamped and slid across the carpet, muffling stains that no one noticed. The kitchen counters were covered in cups, sticky with spilled soda and alcohol. Voices rose in drunken choruses, the laughter of 60 kids colliding in one space. But there was something else, something just beneath the noise. A faint, sour smell crept through the hall, heavy near the master bedroom. A girl wrinkled her nose, pulling her friend's sleeve. "What's that?" she asked. He shrugged, too busy pouring his drink to care. Someone else joked it was old trash, maybe food gone bad. The explanation was enough. In the haze of music and rebellion, questions evaporated. Terrence moved through the crowd like a star on stage. He slapped hands, posed for phone flashes, shouted to the beat. He was the host everyone wanted to be. Cool, unbothered, finally free from the shadow of strict parents. His classmates saw a boy in control. What they didn't see were the fleeting glances he cast toward the locked door at the end of the hall. Every few minutes, his eyes flickered there. Always checking, always guarding. In the backyard, clouds of cigarette smoke drifted under the porch light. A group huddled in the corner, trading whispers over the contents of a small plastic bag. Others played drinking games on the patio, slamming their cups down at cheers. To anyone outside, it looked like the kind of wild party teens dream about, the kind where rules no longer exist. But the truth was never far away. The towels Denise had folded still sat in the bathroom, now damp with spilled beer. Marcus's graded essays lay forgotten in his study, untouched by the wave of bodies filling the house. The warmth the Freemans had built in these walls was replaced by noise and smoke, their absence disguised by laughter that didn't belong. And while 60 teenagers sang along to music, while they spilled across couches and hallways, they never realized how close they were to the truth. Just feet from the dance floor, just behind a locked door, Terrence's secret waited. The question that lingers is chilling. When surrounded by friends, lights, and noise, would you have noticed? Or would you have danced too, never suspecting that beneath the rhythm of the night lay silence that no sound could ever erase? The party was in full swing. Music rattled the walls, cigarette smoke clung to the ceiling, and laughter spilled from every corner of the crowded house. Teenagers packed the living room, spilling into the kitchen, weaving down hallways. To anyone watching from outside, it looked like a celebration of youth, carefree and unbothered. But inside, something darker simmered just beneath the noise. Terrence moved through the chaos like a shadow that refused to blend in. Red cup in hand, a restless energy burned through him. He laughed too loudly, leaned too close, spoke too fast. Most thought it was the alcohol talking, but for Terrence, the drink only loosened what he was desperate to keep contained. At first, it sounded like bragging. He leaned on a doorframe, smirking as he said, "They're gone. You don't even know how gone they are." His friends snorted, assuming it was about a breakup or a petty grudge. Someone shoved his shoulder, telling him to stop being dramatic. The conversation shifted back to sports, to girls. But Terrence wasn't finished. Minutes later, he tried again, this time lowering his voice, his words just audible over the music. "You're standing in a house where no one should be breathing. You think you're safe, but you don't even know." His eyes darted around the room, searching for recognition, for fear, for someone to take the bait. Instead, a drunk teenager laughed nervously and called him extra. The moment fizzled, but Terrence couldn't help himself. Each time he circled the room, his boasts grew darker, more cryptic. He whispered to a girl in the kitchen, "They'll never leave me. I made sure of it." She rolled her eyes, thinking it was some twisted pickup line, and walked away. To another, he muttered, You should have heard them beg. The boy chuckled awkwardly, shaking his head. Nobody pressed him. Nobody wanted to. Yet not everyone dismissed him so easily. In a corner near the stairs, two guests exchanged glances after Terrence's third strange outburst. One whispered, "He's off tonight. You noticed that?" The other shrugged, unwilling to get pulled into something messy. And so the silence held. The discomfort lingered like smoke, but no one dared to fan it into flame. This is the psychology of silence. In a crowd, suspicion scatters like dust. One person feels it, then looks to another for confirmation. But when that other looks away, the feeling collapses. Responsibility dissolves in the noise. In Terrence's case, 60 teenagers heard pieces of a confession, and together, they chose laughter over truth. Still, there were moments when a mask nearly cracked. By the back door, Terrence stared into space, mumbling words no one could quite catch. A guest caught only fragments. Burned. Screamed. Never again. For a second, the boy froze, his stomach tightening. But then someone shouted his name from across the yard, pulling him back into the party. He convinced himself he must have misheard. Every time the truth brushed the surface, distraction pulled it back under. A song changed. A phone buzzed. A friend demanded another drink. The ordinary swallowed the extraordinary. And yet, Terrence couldn't stop. It was as if the weight inside him demanded release, even if no one wanted to carry it. His words spilled into the night, each one a thread leading toward horror. But threads are easy to ignore when the music is loud enough. Imagine it. A house filled with 60 teenagers, all of them brushing shoulders with a killer who was begging to be caught. He wanted someone, anyone, to notice. And they didn't. Or maybe worse, they noticed and chose silence. What would have happened if just one person had listened? One phone call. One question. Could 3 lives have been saved from vanishing without a trace? By Monday morning, the house on Magnolia Drive looked like any other after a weekend of teenage excess. Beer cans spilling out of trash bags, empty bottles scattered in the yard, and the faint echo of music still trapped in the walls. To outsiders, it seemed nothing more than a wild party gone too far. But one guest carried away something heavier than a hangover. He couldn't shake Terrence's words. They hadn't been screamed or shouted, just murmured between songs, as if meant to slip past unnoticed. "My folks aren't ever coming back." At first, the boy laughed. Everyone did. But as the smell in that house grew stronger, as the locked bedroom door loomed larger in his memory, it gnawed at him. Fear turned into shame, shame into dread. Finally, he did the unthinkable for a teenager. He told an adult. That adult was his English teacher. On Tuesday morning, he pulled her aside, his face pale, his words halting. He spoke of the weekend, of the smell, of the strange remark Terrence had repeated more than once. She listened, her eyes narrowing, the weight of responsibility pressing in. Within an hour, she had made the call. That afternoon, 2 patrol cars rolled onto Magnolia Drive. The officers expected noise, maybe minors drinking, maybe vandalism. What they found was different. The music had died, the crowd had thinned, but the stench, thick, unmistakable, hung in the air. One officer later said it clung to the back of his throat before he even crossed the threshold. Inside, the home was both ordinary and grotesque. A living room littered with red cups, stained carpets from spilled beer, a kitchen counter sticky with dried liquor. But upstairs, the odor grew unbearable. The master bedroom door was locked. The officers knocked once, twice. No answer. They forced it open. What they saw inside the closet would haunt them for years. The bodies of Marcus and Denise Freeman lay wrapped in blankets, shoved together as if hidden in shame. Their once proud home had become their tomb. The air was hot, sour, suffocating. One officer turned away, retching. Another froze, trying to process the sight of 2 pillars of the community discarded like refuse in the very house where they had raised their son. Downstairs, Terrence was seated at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the wood, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He didn't ask what was happening. He didn't protest. When the officers approached, he simply extended his wrists, as though he had been expecting this moment all along. The teenagers who lingered in the house, some too drunk, some too dazed, watched in silence as Terrence was escorted out. They saw no panic in him, no fear, only an unsettling calm. For them, the weekend had ended in whispers of something unreal. Now, the truth stood in front of them, cuffed and walking past the wreckage of his own making. What does justice mean when the killer is not a stranger lurking outside, but the child they nurtured, the son they sacrificed for, the boy who carried their name? How does a community begin to understand that kind of betrayal? And who among them will ever forget that they were dancing above the dead? By September of 2012, the Freeman murders had become more than a crime. They had become a trial that the entire state of Florida seemed to be watching. On the morning jury selection began, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, neighbors, and classmates of Terrence Freeman. Some came for answers, others for closure, and many for a spectacle they wished had never happened. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was taut. The gallery was filled with teachers, nurses who had worked alongside Denise, former students of Marcus, and teenagers who had danced in that house the weekend the murders took place. Every face told a different story: grief, shame, anger, disbelief. The prosecution opened with a brutal timeline. Terrence arming himself with a kitchen knife, waiting until his parents slept, and dragging their bodies into a closet before inviting 60 people into the same house. They showed photographs, grainy, clinical images that made the gallery flinch. They argued this was not impulse. This was premeditation, step by step, choice by choice. The defense countered with a different story. They painted Terrence as a boy trapped between strict parents and suffocating expectations, a teenager struggling with depression and isolation. They spoke of underdeveloped judgment, of a brain not yet fully mature. They pleaded for the jury to see him as broken, not evil. Then came the witnesses. One of the first to take the stand was a teenage girl who had been at the party. She was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the railing of the witness box. Her voice cracked as she recounted Terrence's words. "My folks aren't ever coming back." She admitted she laughed then, but the memory of the odor, the locked bedroom door, and Terrence's expression had haunted her since. Tears ran down her cheeks as she whispered, "I should have told someone sooner." Another boy followed, his shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt. He admitted that Terrence had confided in him, almost boasting, but he had brushed it off. "I didn't want to be the guy who ruined the party," he confessed, staring down at the table. The courtroom fell silent, every adult in the room feeling the sting of those words. Teachers testified too. Terrence's math teacher spoke of his intelligence, but also his detachment, his tendency to retreat into himself. His art instructor described sketches that grew darker over time, drawings of faceless figures, of locked doors. Each detail tightened the noose around the defense's plea for mercy. The most devastating testimony came from Denise's sister. She walked to the stand carrying a framed photograph of Marcus and Denise on their wedding day. Her voice broke as she described Denise's compassion as a nurse, Marcus's devotion to his students, and the pride they had in raising their only child. "They gave him everything," she said through tears, "and he took it all away." Through it all, Terrence remained almost motionless. He sat at the defense table, eyes fixed on the wood grain, rarely blinking. When a witness broke down sobbing, he did not look up. When the prosecutor replayed his party invitation for the jury, he did not flinch. Only once, when a former friend from school testified, did a faint smirk cross his lips. It lasted seconds, but in a room filled with raw grief, it felt like a wound reopening. After weeks of testimony, the case moved to its end. The judge instructed the jury. The attorneys gave their closing arguments. One side, demanding accountability for 2 lives brutally ended, the other pleading for recognition of youth and mental instability. Then came the wait. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, the gallery held its breath. The foreman stood, hands shaking, and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice was steady as he delivered the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. A hush fell over the room. Some cried in relief, others in sorrow. For Terrence, there was no visible reaction. He simply stood as the bailiff cuffed him, eyes flat, expression unchanged, as though he had known this was coming all along. A son condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars. A community left to wonder how love, discipline, and guidance could end in such betrayal. But was this sentence closure, or only the beginning of a tragedy that would never truly end? The Freeman murders did not just claim 2 lives. They ruptured the sense of safety that a small town had built its identity upon. In the days that followed Terrence's arrest, the schools filled with whispers. Teenagers who had packed themselves into that house looked at each other with downcast eyes. In hallways, some avoided one another, terrified someone would ask the question they dreaded. Why didn't you say something? A girl in science class broke down in tears when asked a simple question about homework. A boy couldn't look at his own mother after she discovered he had been there, laughing, while her friends' bodies lay hidden just down the hall. Parents lashed out at their own children, at one another, at the school system. At a tense town hall meeting, voices rose above folding chairs and fluorescent lights. One mother stood, trembling with rage. You're telling me 60 kids knew something was off, and not one of you called for help? Not one. The silence that followed was heavier than the anger. Some kids stared at the floor. Some parents clutched their children, as if to keep them from drifting toward that same darkness. The school district rushed to respond. Assemblies were held under banners that read, "See something, say something." Counselors reminded students that silence can be deadly. But those lessons came too late for Marcus and Denise Freeman. This was not the first time America had watched children cross the unthinkable line. Towns had faced Columbine, Jonesboro, Oxford. The names differed, the ages changed, but the pattern echoed. Signs overlooked, parents blindsided, communities left to wonder if they could ever have stopped it. And so the question deepened, spreading like a stain across the community. Were Terrence's classmates complicit, or just afraid? Could one voice, raised on that drunken night, have altered history? The Freeman home stands empty now. Windows dark, grass growing tall, a mailbox stuffed with letters no one will ever open. Children ride their bikes past, but never stop. It is not just a house anymore. It is a wound, a reminder carved into the center of suburbia. This was not only the story of one boy's violence. It was about what happens when anger festers, when entitlement meets rejection, when silence drowns out instinct. It was about a community lulled by the idea that danger always comes from outside. In truth, it can grow within. The trial gave a verdict: life without parole. The law had spoken. Yet the families of this town were left with something no sentence could repair. Parents now lie awake at night, staring into the dark, asking themselves, do I really know my child? Would I see the warning signs if they lived under my roof? The Freeman tragedy sits alongside others in American memory, a chilling reminder that the boundary between normal life and nightmare is thinner than we wish to believe. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones who break into your home. They are the ones you raise, the ones who sit at your dinner table, the ones who grow quietly, invisibly, inside it. And when the door finally closes behind them, the question remains, did we ever really know them at all?